Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, David Russell. Today's episode is sponsored by Dave's Charm School. We're teaching you habit development, how to get better habits so you get more done in less time and you have better relationships and you achieve more of what you want to achieve. Life's more fulfilling. Check it out, davescharmschool.com. Free for 30 days. You can't lose. Today's episode is with Cunneen of Hire Image. Do you background check every person before you hire them? If not, you're making a big mistake. And I have taught that for 15, 16 years. You cannot hire anyone without doing a background check. Hire Image is Manage to Win's partner for background checks. You can find their information. There's a link in our Hire the Best page section on our site, but you can also go to hireimage.com. This podcast will tell you why you absolutely have to do background checks. You're going to listen to this and go, oh, that's why that person didn't work out. I could have known this before. Let's dive in. Welcome, Christine, to the show. We are going to talk today about your background check services and what goes on there because we got a fair amount of people lying these days, don't we, when they're trying to get hired?
Yeah. Well, hello, David, and thanks for having me on your show. And yes, as my partner Tom says, people lie, which is what keeps us in business. So yes, so we run a background screening and drug screening company, and we work with employers throughout the country and even internationally. But employers are just trying to hire the best people, right? So we do find that people still lie on their resume or what they put through for their background screening. They might say they graduated school, never went to the school. A lot of employment verification type of fibs that go on, and or they might say they don't have a criminal record and they just got out of jail. So we see it all here.
So I actually recommend to my clients, and I have for years as part of my Hire the Best system, that one of the things that's an absolute must when you hire is that you have to do a background check. And there's just too many people that feel it's okay to lie these days. And if they're going to be a liar when you hire them, how do you think they're going to be once they're on board?
Right. Yeah. It's so true. And it really is a differentiator, right? You want to make sure that they check out to everything they say and their credentials, even checking, if they say they're licensed or whatever their certifications might be. You want to be checking those things too. They just, it's competitive out there. So you can understand people trying to put their best foot forward, but it's not their foot sometimes, right? So, and I appreciate you recommending background checks because I too obviously recommend background checks. The things that we've seen come through this office, there's a lot of stories that happen. So you want to make sure that you're hiring the person you think you're hiring.
That's right. And I should do a disclaimer. Manage to Win, our company, has a relationship with Hire Image, and we actually recommend Hire Image. We have a special package and everything that we recommend that we work with you guys. But I remember like 15 years ago, I was just starting out consulting, and I was in my first year or two, and I had a client, and I told him this. I said, you got to do a background check. You can't hire without one. And so he called me up about a week later. He goes, hey, I have never done a background check before. But I had a guy come in, he interviewed, and on a scale of 1 to 10, this guy was like an 11. He was everything I wanted. He was perfect. And towards the end, like you suggested, Dave, I said to him, hey, by the way, we're going to do a background check. Is there anything that might show up that you want to let me know about? And the guy says, no, I got nothing. And the background check came back. The guy was a felon. He was a sexual predator. He'd been arrested for DUI. I mean, he had this list.
Wow.
And the guy said, I got to thank you. That money I spent on the background check was peanuts compared to what I would have had at risk to have this guy join my organization.
Yeah, it's like I tell people it's an insurance policy, right? Just like we have you have insurance to protect yourself. I think of a background check the same way. It's a small amount of money, but it's your insurance to make sure you're hiring the right people. We've had, and we don't turn away anyone because I'm so passionate about background screening. So if you're a doctor's office and you hire one person, I don't care. We're going to work with you because we've had an orthodontist, right? That he had a small practice. He hired this office manager who had experience in the dental practices. But yeah, because they had embezzled funds from the place they came from before, they never did background checks. This person opened up credit cards in this dentist's name, just like ruined his credit, just awful, just had him almost bankrupt. So now we do his background checks. Again, it's just a small company, but I don't care if you're hiring one person or thousands of people. It's just as important.
What about family members? Family members, friends? Huh?
Well, you'd be surprised what you find out. You know what I find is a lot of companies, the HR departments get a little kind of nervous when they're hiring C-level. That's when it gets really like, oh, we can't ask them that. And oh, they don't want to do it or they're too busy. But those are the ones you really want to check. Like, are they in the news? Yeah. Have they had a lot of lawsuits? Do they have a prior record? I mean, and that's what happens when you skip those steps. When you have a process at a company like background checks, you better be consistent on it and don't like shy away because it's the C-level, it's the CFO or the CEO, because those, a lot of times those are the folks that might have something in their background. So.
Oh, yeah. One of my common stories, a close friend of mine, is the way I worded a close friend of mine. And he hired somebody who walked in the door, said, I can solve all your problems, and, gave him authority. And he'd been referred by someone else who was a former employee, trusted. Turned out that guy had only met him once. And, he later found out this guy had 4 lawsuits against him. And it wasn't that he was a bad guy, I don't think. I think he was just incompetent. And he just, and so he would bend the rules, and in some cases, do things that were totally wrong. And it costs about $1.5 million.
Wow. Yeah. And that's, I've even had military, like people fake military documents to say, oh, I'm retired military. And, those folks that are in military know about DD 214s when they're no longer in the military. And that's a way to verify just the things people come up with. I'm always like, if they would just spend that time instead of being fraudulent and doing good work, imagine where we'd be as a country. But yeah, there's the things we've seen, the doctor diplomas and, just making things up. It's just, it's happening every day.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I was, by the way, back to the friends and family, just to let you know, I actually recommend to my clients, you test everybody, including friends and family, because you know them at a certain level, but you don't live in their house. And so there may be things going on that you need to know about.
Right.
So it's pretty nuts. I am curious, you and I have never talked before. I've worked with your team, but I recommend that people do a civil court check in the county the person resides, the biggest county nearby.
Right.
Because that was the problem this friend of mine had, was those 4 lawsuits were civil.
Right.
Now in California, it may be, because our laws are so weird, it may be that you cannot hire someone if they have something bad on their civil court check. And what I tell my clients is, I can't give you legal advice, but if they're suing their neighbor or they're suing their past employer or vice versa, or a past client versus vice versa, you want to know. I can't tell you whether you can make a decision on it, but don't you want to know that?
Right. And, David, that's, gosh, I should take you out to trade shows with me. So civil searches are a good way to see if somebody is either constantly suing maybe former employers or they're constantly getting sued. There's a lot of employers that don't do that as part of their search. But to your point, it is another kind of look into the overall person and what they bring or don't bring to the table. And a civil search will unravel that kind of thing. There's a federal civil search. And like you said, also the local county where they live. And California is a strange little state, but most states you can look back 7 years under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is what we're regulated on the federal side, and California also. So 7 years is kind of that look back period, which is enough, right? You don't have to go back too far. But yeah, civil searches are, I swear by them, but it does delay the process a little bit. And sometimes companies are like, just got to get these in there quick. So they don't want to wait or pay the extra money. But to your point, it does unravel and show you, some past histories that you might be interested in.
All right, Christine, sure. I'll make kind of a broad statement, but I'm 64 years old and I still haven't found a shortcut that was more profitable than taking the time to do something right in business. I haven't. And this background check thing, one item I'm curious about is, when do you recommend the company does the background check? Because most of mine will do it, that they make the job offer subject to a background check. But I have had some not a lot, but I have had some that like if they have a first interview and it's a great interview, particularly when they feel they got to hurry or else they're going to miss out on the person,
Right.
they'll immediately say, hey, we still got one more interview to go and that type of thing, but we'd like to do a background check. Anything we might see on that you want to bring up. And, they have that conversation, but then they'll do it right then and there.
So that's a great point you bring up. Definitely, there's no federal law that says you can't do it pre-offer. We actually work with a lot of large call centers. They're going to job fairs and they have to say, get a class of 500 in. So they might throw, 1,200 through to see who's going to pass the background check. So in some instances, it does work. But again, not to give legal advice, but there are some states that have laws that say it has to be post-offer. There is a new federal law for federal contractors that goes into play in December of this year that says if you're a federal contractor, they want you to wait till post-offer. So, and also if you do drug screening, if that's part of the package, a lot of the drug screening laws in different states require you to wait till post-offer. So you got to see where you're doing business and if it's allowed or not allowed. But I'm a fan. For me personally, I'm allowed in my state and I do it pre-offer, sorry. So I'll get my best candidates and I'll put them through and just make sure everybody is on the up and up before moving forward.
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, like the package we have from your company is less than $100. And if I think of the time I'm going to take and my people are going to take in that second interview and then putting everything together for the offer and the onboarding, et cetera, then I easily recoup the $100 if there's a problem. And if there's not a problem, I'm already fairly convinced I'm going to hire the person anyway. So it's a good investment.
Right.
I mean, by the way, I'm Scottish, so I wait until after the offer. but I do see the other argument where pre-offer, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I talked to somebody in the banking industry yesterday that HR, they're like, we can't do it pre-offer. But the CEO is like, we're getting these bad candidates and we got to move this along. So can we do it so I had this whole conversation. I'm like, you can, as long as you guys are doing background checks. So go for it. So it does depend on the organization, depends on where you're doing business. And you really got to look into it if you're doing drug testing for sure.
Now, what's your feeling on doing the employment checks? So the prior employment checks. Now, I typically recommend that my clients do it themselves because I recommend they ask questions that go beyond kind of name, rank, and serial number. I like them to pose scenarios with that former client of say, okay, in this position, this person may face this, blah, 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 blah. How do you think they'll respond? But obviously, there are a lot of companies that are outsourcing that to your team.
Right.
And so what are your thoughts on that?
So we have the employment verifications, which tends to get the title and, the dates and all of that good stuff. And are you eligible for rehire? But we also do professional references. That's what I recommend really, on top of the employment verifications, you want to get those professional references. And here's this is like my favorite question. We have like a set standard questions and customers can customize, they can add, they can, I have some that want a scoring model. I love asking all the references the same question. What 3 adjectives would you use to describe David? Because you'll notice if they're consistent or not, or if they're trying to use a word that's, what do they mean by that? So I always throw that in there as a reference from my own personal when I'm checking folks. But no, definitely I recommend professional references. I think you find out a lot, whether folks do it internally or they outsource it to a company like Higher Image. You do find out quite a bit. And you'd be surprised. You think, a reference is only going to tell you good things because the person put them down as a reference. We've gotten some interesting responses on those references.
Yeah, I find that if I do the scenario approach and I just approach them and I'm listening for when they're saying, well, I don't know about that, then that's kind of a yellow flag type of thing. So
yeah. And, David, while we're talking kind of about that and checking prior employments, it's like a lot of bigger companies now are using big data, right? They're going to have these companies that are going to just spit out which resumes to look at and which ones not to. And that's kind of a big thing now under the new Biden administration. They're looking at big data. So, for your employers that are listening to just kind of really, you got to know what you are using for your screening tools, like understand the whole process from start to finish, because it is going to start getting looked at to see, is there any inherent, bias built into some of those big data in those systems. So just want to, and that reminds me too, I actually I've done work with, I used to chair the National Association of Professional Background Screeners, which is now the Professional Background Screeners Association. But back in 2012, the EEOC changed the guidance on the use of criminal records in employment screening. And one of the chairs at that time, Vicki Lipnick, she was an acting chair under the Trump administration and retired in November. We have her speaking at a webinar for us in this May. When is it? May 19th at 3:00. So if you want to check out Higher Image, we have a link to get registered. But she's going to be talking about what changes are going to be happening with the hiring process, what she sees happening under the new administration, especially with that big data and how it's going to be used or, possibly looked at for employment purposes.
Yeah, bias is a concern across the board, and I think it's important that people are trained on a very fair hiring process, and that they understand themselves. We do a lot of soft skills training now, Dave's Charm School, and really building that out. And it's so people can understand themselves better and develop better habits. But we have to be aware of any bias, because we don't want bias. That's no good. I did have one client that had kind of a funny thing. They hired this guy who was a tech. He worked from his home. This was well before COVID. This was probably a decade ago. But they hired this guy, and they weren't working with me at the time. And they hired him, and they had never met him. They had talked with him over the phone. I don't even know whether they had done an online meeting back then with him, but they talked with him on the phone. And then he was in sales, and he was going to be in that area with someone else on their team. So they were in that area. They called the guy and said, "Hey, we're in the area. We never met. We were wondering if we could come by and meet you or meet at a coffee shop or whatever." And the guy said, "If you come by my home, I will call the police. You are not to come by my home. You are not welcome in my home." And they had this kind of dialogue that went along that route. And they were like, Whoa, what type of person did we hire?
What did we hire? Jeez.
And they weren't doing background checks.
Wow. I never heard of a story like that. But yeah, the world has changed with remote work, right? So that's going back years ago. But now due to COVID, so many people working from home, or now it's going to be maybe a hybrid model. So yeah, do you worry about other people in the home, right? If you have sensitive things in your computer and PII, personal identifying information, you want to make sure people aren't getting on that computer. And, you can't background check the whole family, but in my mind, I wish people could, because you don't know who's in the house. But with the remote hiring too, it's changed the world quite a bit, but also employers have to be careful now. So if you hire someone and they're in California, they're going to be working in California. You got to follow California rules. And as you mentioned at the outset, California is kind of has its own set of rules. I think California should be its own country with all the rules and extra laws you have out there.
Well, there are certain people that would like it to be that way. We hope it never happens, but hopefully some saner people will eventually get elected. But it's crazy right now. We actually have a partnership with some lawyers who do wage and hour training because of PAGA lawsuits and employee class action lawsuits. There are some lawyers that are becoming multimillionaires by suing employers, and then they get most of the settlements. And California basically, on February 25th, the California Supreme Court came out with a ruling on meal breaks. It basically said if there's any mistake in a meal break time recording, so if somebody takes a 29-minute meal break instead of a 30-minute, or they miss a meal break, or they don't take it within the first 5 hours, if there's any mistake, the employer is automatically guilty, and they are guilty until proven innocent. It's called a rebuttable presumption.
Well, these plaintiffs' attorneys, we find them in our industry too. They're looking at employers and background screeners, and just because the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that federal law, is such a strict statute, you have one word wrong. These lawyers, they're out there trolling employment applications to see what people are asking and how they're asking. And so that's what we tell employers, like, you got to make sure that stuff is buttoned up, work with a partner that understands it, keeps you in compliance. Because to your point, these plaintiffs' attorneys, they're just in it for themselves. They don't really care about the consumer or the end user. And so nobody wins except for those attorneys. And, they're not really helping the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's not. It is very common for these employees that get represented, or past employees that get represented, to get $20, $50, while the attorney gets, $1 million or whatever.
Right.
And anyway, we took their training, we put it all online, built it up, so now it fully documents the person's trained. They take an exam to confirm they understand it. They certify it with signature.
Oh, that's good.
And then they do quarterly check-ins where they confirm, yes, I understand it, and I'm abiding by it, all the policies.
Well, that's good. That's
we're
smart.
trying to stop the lawsuits without attorneys. Anyway, let me go back to this background check stuff.
Yeah.
So one thing I don't think many people understand is obviously with a reference check, your people are going to make a call. So you're not doing big data. You're not just doing a data run.
Right.
It's a manual process. Talk to the audience about how you check education also.
Sure. So education verifications, we're going direct to a school, but some of the larger universities, colleges, they outsource it to a clearinghouse. So we might have to go to a clearinghouse, but if not, we're going direct to the registrar. Same thing with employment. We're not going to go to a database unless the employer kind of forces us that way. And then I say the same thing with court records, right? You got some companies that are just kind of spitting out these nationwide databases, which kind of garbage in, garbage out. They're not great. It's an extra help and a tool, but we go direct to the courthouse. So if someone, shows up that they did have a record, even in a database, we're going to go to that courthouse and make sure that we find that record and we know it wasn't expunged or it does belong to that person, get the proper identifiers. So there's kind of a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes at a background screening company. I always say we're like the quarterback of the whole process because the applicant puts their information in and then we got the criminal side going with our crim people. And then we got the verifications. I got my employment screening verifications people, my education verification screening people. We got the labs going for the drug screening, but it all comes back into my portal and we're the quality control to make sure is everything that came back in, our people calling, did they spell everything right? Did they get the information? And then the crim side, is it reportable? So it's kind of like, then it all comes back into the system and then we quality control it before it goes back out to the employer so they can know, we got everything we possibly could get on that person and it is that person if something did return.
Yeah, I just don't see how anyone can not do this. I mean, it is so important. Right. And you don't have the expertise on your staff to do it. And I have had clients say, well, what do I really care if, their education stuff's wrong? It's not a question that it's wrong. It's a question, do you want to hire someone who's a liar?
Right.
Yeah.
If they're gonna fudge that, what else are they gonna fudge in your organization?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I've had that with someone who had I've heard it referred to as what is it? The OJ symptom or whatever, where he just had lied to himself so long that he had a college degree that he believed it. And but he didn't have one. He actually was like 2 credits shy or 3 credits shy. They allowed him to walk, because he was a nice guy or whatever the deal was. But, he was lying about it.
Yeah, we get a lot of folks when they lie about their education. A lot of times they may have won a semester to the school or they went 1 year, but they dropped out. But they can talk the talk, right? So if it comes up on the interview, like, oh, I went to Hofstra in New York. Yeah. Oh, I went there. And then you could talk about the rat or the, like the different, you still can talk the talk, right? So we find a lot of folks do that when they're lying about their education. But, we've seen a high level cases of, right, like medical, they say that they have their, PhD and they write these books. And someone's like, they didn't get their PhD. So those lies kind of follow people along too until someone finally checks. But yeah, to your point, if someone's going to lie at that level coming into your organization, are you really going to trust that, they have that integrity inside your organization, which integrity is, you can't train that.
Yeah. And this guy lied about other things. And I've seen that in other situations too. It's just unfortunate. So it's really cheap insurance to do a background check and to get that done. Now, what about the drug check? Let me, 2 common questions I'm going to ask you. Let me wait on drug check. Credit checks. So talk to me about credit checks. When do you do credit checks? Should you do credit checks? Who gets credit checks? What are your thoughts on that?
So we sell credit checks. I'm not a big fan of them personally. Okay. So there's other things you can look at. So first of all, you shouldn't do it on every employee. I went into a manufacturing plant. They're like, yeah, we do credit checks. I'm like, on everybody? Yeah, that's just how we've done it. I'm like, you don't need to do it on a warehouse worker. You're going to do a credit check. It should be, job related. Is the person in the accounting area? Are they dealing with the finances? That sort of thing. Then, that's fine to be looking at the credit check. I personally, there's other things you can look at because the credit bureaus were actually sued by, gosh, I think it was like 30 attorney generals because they had wrong information. So they would have liens and judgments on there, but it didn't belong to the person and you couldn't prove it, right? So a lot of them have started the credit bureaus have been removing those. So a lot of times you want to look at those liens and judgments. You want to see if they filed bankruptcy. We can do searches for that outside of doing a credit report. And to me, it's a little invasive of like, what your mortgage is, how much your car payment is. I personally don't like it, but we sell it if it's, folks need it. And it mostly is used in the financial position. But a lot of states now have extra requirements. Well, New York City, you can't even run a credit report. Forget it. If you're doing it in New York City, stop because you're going to get in trouble. But a lot of other states have like extra requirements on the authorizations and the disclosures and just extra steps that another way you can get sued, like you didn't check the right box to run that credit report, So that's why to me, if you're really concerned, let's look at those liens and judgments. Let's look at the bankruptcies. That's really what you'd be looking for anyway, in my mind.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same page that if it's a position that's a financial position, then that makes sense. Or if it's a person with financial responsibility, it might even be up to the CEO, but I don't know. But, one of the things too that can show is character. And I don't necessarily, of course, I haven't been the best money steward all my life either. So, to be candid, so I can't go and, call someone else on something unless they're not managing it, and if they're not managing it, it's one thing if they have a little bit of debt, that's okay.
Right. But what we've found too is like someone could have a medical condition, they maybe went through a divorce and that really kind of killed their credit. And now during COVID, right, how many people have lost their jobs? So their credit might be impacted. And it's like, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be a bad employee. So to me, to kind of how to measure it to say they're going to be a good employee or not a good employee, it could just be they had a tough time of it for whatever reason. So it's hard to tell. I think if you put the whole thing together by looking at that bankruptcy, liens, judgments, the civil searches, criminal searches, all the other credentials, I think, you have a better picture in my mind.
Yeah, I had a client in New York, a great client, and I mentioned this story online on our podcast before, but he hired a young gal, or he made an offer to a young gal, then did the background check. And, he asked her, you have anything on your background? And this had nothing to do with credit, by the way. Mm-hmm. And she said, no, everything's fine. And then she had a felony out for arrest. And so he called her, he said, hey, I really like to hire you, but this thing came up. And she goes, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that. A couple of months ago, I was at a party and I basically, talked back to an officer. I was rude to him and they cited me. And I totally forgot about it. I haven't gone in and dealt with that. I'll go in and deal with that right away and I'll bring you proof that I've done that. And she did that and brought it back. He's a super nice guy. He hired her and she was a great employee for a year. And then she moved on. Well,
I think too, it's about having the conversation. So sometimes people may have something on their criminal record or something may have come up. It's really then to have that individualized assessment. Everybody has a different situation or, kind of what's their story behind it. So giving them an opportunity to explain it is always a good thing.
Yeah. And now talk to me about the drug check thing, because now in California, marijuana's legal. It's promoted on billboards. It's a wonderful thing. Everybody should be smoking. Oh boy. So dumb. Anyway, so what do you do with drug checks? You check somebody, it's like, oh no, you're smoking marijuana. Well, you can't deal with that now, or whatever else. Maybe they got opiate stuff. What do you do?
It puts employers in such a bad spot. So there's like a third of our states right now that have legalized recreational marijuana. And then you got over 70% of our states have some form of medical marijuana that's legalized. So it has gotten so confusing for employers. But here's the problem with marijuana or the THC, which is what we test in the drug screening, is there's no test to say someone's high right now. So you could have smoked while you were watching a football game on a Sunday and then went for a drug test on a Tuesday and test positive for that THC. And there's no way to tell the difference. So employers are kind of caught in this tough spot, right?
Well, doesn't THC stay in your system for like 30 days?
If you're a habitual user, it can be in your system for up to 30 days. Yes, you are correct. If you're, habitual. If you're not habitual, it's a little less time. But what's become more popular is oral fluid lab-based testing, not just oral fluid that you buy from, some other country. But when you do the lab-based one, that is more of a recent usage, but it still doesn't get you like, oh, they're high right now, but it is kind of a shorter window. So we are recommending that a lot more now, the oral fluid lab-based. But safety sensitive positions, to me, should still be doing it. If it's kind of office work and your state has legalized recreational marijuana in some form, you might want to look at your policy. You can remove THC from the testing and do all the other drug testing. That's always an option employers have. And we've seen that trend start to happen where if it's not safety sensitive, they're removing the marijuana from the testing panel. So that's kind of the way some of it's going. But unfortunately, I actually just, testified in Rhode Island, but, they're trying to legalize recreational marijuana here and they don't have the right protections for employers. So if you are a safety sensitive, they're just like, you can't even test for it. What if there's an accident? They crashed the forklift. And actually, I have a story. We have a manufacturer in Massachusetts, and the person went out at their break time. They ate one of those gummies or did something, but they didn't realize what was in it. The guy had lost his mind. He came in trying to kill people with the forklift, like trying to run them over, going backwards. And he lost his mind. I mean, he lost his job too, and he admitted it. He goes, I had a gummy. I didn't know what was in it and lost his mind. But so there's a real, it's a safety issue at a workplace if someone's not in their right mind. But unfortunately, it's so tricky with there's not an exact test for THC.
It's tough. And forgive me, I'm really naive in these areas, but is there anything that can be vaped that is a drug? Can the vaping devices have drug-related issues also, or are they strictly like a
they can have THC,
equivalent?
They can have THC in there. And then, what we've found is this is another thing. And I tell employers, educate your workforce, especially if you're doing random drug testing, because you've probably heard about those CBD oils. Oh, you have arthritis, kind of rub it in your knuckles and it's going to make you feel good. Or you put it on your dog, right? You can use it for your dog, but that can get in your bloodstream. And it's not all regulated. I think there's only one FDA approved CBD cream or oil. And all the others aren't regulated to the extent of how much THC is in there. We've had folks who have failed a drug test and they'll say, and you don't know what their whole history is. They said, and they've been at this employer, always tested clean, never had a problem. And now they're testing positive. And they're like, well, I use CBD oil. So some of those CBD oils, you want to know how much THC is in there. So if you're at an employer and they have to random test or is safety sensitive, be super careful on that CBD creams and oils. You just don't know what you're putting on your body there.
Oh, man.
Who would know? You have to think of those things, right? But it's not on the packaging all the time. So be careful.
Crazy. So, all right. Well, any last comments for our folks here? I think this has been fabulous for people. And where do they go to learn more about your company services?
Yeah, well, thank you. So hireimage.com, hire like HIRE, right behind me there on my, just come to our website. We're happy to help out. We do anything that an employer needs before they're going to hire somebody, and happy to help anybody out. But just my last minute things are really, it's tough. Employers, HR departments have so much on their plate to worry about, kind of you want to offload this onto somebody who cares and is doing right by you and worries about all the compliance, worries about what you have to do and knows what they're doing in this area. Like we said earlier, it's an insurance policy. So, come to hireimage.com and we would help you out and make sure, we're taking care of you. We're not just going to put you in a cookie cutter. You have to do it this way. We're going to work with you depending on where your employees are at, where you're located. There's just so much to it that you can get yourself into trouble without it just innocently, right? So you want to work with a professional for sure.
Oh, I totally agree. And if any of the audience is interested in how we recommend your services, it would be under our Hire the Best tab.
Right.
We love you guys. We love what you do. You do it at a very fair price. And it's, for me, I say it again to the audience, you cannot hire anyone without doing a background check.
Right.
And you just can't do it these days. I don't care who they are. So please do that. And thank you very much, Christine. Really enjoyed having you on the show.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. See you soon.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Christine, please subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a rating, leave us feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And tune in next week. We've got another great show coming.